name is Ella Kate Marisi, and you are listening to More Than Child's Play with your host, my mommy, Lacey Marisi, and my Aunt Nicole Surgeon. They are authors, therapists, and most importantly, mommies. And man, can they talk. So sit back and relax and learn from their village. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of More Than Child's Play podcast. This is Lacey Marisi, speech language pathologist and co-owner of Milestones and Miracles. And today I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest, Stacy Lamberg. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you, Lacey. It's great to be here.
Great. So I wanted to formally introduce our audience to you, Stacy. You have devoted your career to supporting communication and connection between children and caregivers. You are a speech language pathologist yourself, and you've worked in the homes of hundreds of families across Southern California. Stacy has guest lectured across the United States to early childhood specialists, and she has more than 15 years of professional practice as an SLP. Stacy is state licensed, nationally board certified, and credentialed as an early intervention specialist. She's a lifelong learner and a multi-year award recipient of ASHA's ACE Award. Stacy has expertise in the areas of autism, apraxia, and early intervention. So I first discovered Stacy a few years back on Facebook. She was leading a Facebook group that was all about the effect of screens on early childhood development and especially language development, since she is an SLP. So I was very interested in that a few years ago, stumbled upon that group and joined that group and learned a lot from her there. She provided guidance to early intervention professionals regarding screen time exposure and child development. She provided us with research, and it was just helpful for me to learn from all that, but then also to have that information to share with families that I was serving at the time about the impact or possible impact that screen time could have on their child's development. And it's still a very hot topic area in our profession, and the research continues to grow as we continue to guide families on what's best for their children. But then from that group, Stacy also started something separate. It is a community of practice called Coach the Coach. And I was one of the lucky recipients of a free membership to that community of practice for 6 months. And I learned so much in that short 6 months. It was a monthly virtual meeting where we got on, and Stacy shared information about family-guided routines-based intervention. And she also shared information during one session about adult learning principles. And, it's crazy because over the years of working in early intervention, I will have children that sometimes aren't making the progress that I hope for, or the progress that I think maybe they should be making. And I get frustrated at myself. What am I doing wrong? And sometimes it's how we're teaching the parents. Parents don't always recognize or realize how they learn best. So sometimes that's our job to help them figure that out, and then to deliver our coaching, our delivery of service in the best way that the parent can learn. But that's not something that we learn in grad school, or at least I didn't. I was taught how to work with kids, not with adults, as far as how adults learn. So again, she shared some great information in those few short 6 months. I was able to be a part of that community of practice, and I just knew that I wanted to invite her on to share her knowledge with you all, our audience, just to help you strengthen your practice as an early intervention provider. Or if you're a parent of a child out there that receives early intervention services, this kind of gives you something to think about to make the most of your services that you're receiving. You can share with your providers how you learn best, and then they can deliver that service to you and your child in the best way possible so that you get the most out of your services, again, through early intervention. Okay, so thank you again, Stacy, for being here. I'm super anxious for us to get started. So let's just start very at the beginning. Let's go ahead and discuss and identify to our audience, what exactly are adult learning principles?
Good intro question for the topic. So when we think of adult learning principles, I think the biggest thing to consider is that they're not child learning principles. So we know from the research that children and adults learn differently, and that children tend to learn best through everyday experiences with familiar people in their lives and based on their own personal interests, right? So some children, really like water play and might, be more inclined to learn from this type of activity, and another child really likes something different. So, so we have some information about how children learn. And just like you said, we often get a lot of information like that in graduate school. So we learn about child development, positive and negative reinforcement. We learn about play development. We learn just exactly what you described, learning how to work with children. And in early intervention, we realize that if we're using that coaching routines-based model, it's about how parents learn and supporting caregivers who are adults. So adult learning principles are just different. So there's a lot of research on how adults learn. And I like to think of it, I think the best way, if I'm going to kind of describe it, is I use an acronym SCRAP. And I just do this because there's a lot of components, and it's just nice to keep in mind some core things to think about when we're working with adults and how they learn best. So if I know that I'm teaching an adult something with SCRAP, I want to keep it simple, right? So adults in general, especially when I think of early intervention though, a lot of adults are overwhelmed. They may have multiple children. They may have multiple children with special needs. They may have many other things going on, especially in light of the world in the last year. So when we think of adults, we really want to keep things simple. We don't want to teach 20 different concepts, 5 different strategies, have 30 different goals. The more we can simplify things, the more we can solidify their learning. So that's the S in the SCRAP. And then the C I use to remind myself of context. So when I think of context, I'm thinking of making it in a meaningful context to the adult. So, I could be abstract, and I can say, in this hypothetical situation with your child, you're going to want to do that. Or I could make it meaningful, and I can say, well, what's happening right now? Or what's important? What's the value to your family? So maybe one family prays before a meal, and that's going to be their opportunity to model a gesture or a sign or something functional, and another family maybe doesn't. So that wouldn't be a functional context for a different family. A different family might, take off their shoes before they come inside. Another family might not. And then when we think of functional context, we also think about the context where what's valuable to the parent. So that I need support during this happens every day. And so that would be a functional or valuable context versus let me come in with Mr. Potato Head and teach you how to do this with your child. That would be a less functional context in terms of adult learning principles. So that's the S and the C. And then R would be reflection. So a lot of us have heard about reflective practice, and this is just a component to how adults learn. So when adults have the ability to reflect, which means kind of to think about what just happened, what's in the near or recent past, and to put it back in their own words. So how did that feel? And when we think of reflection, we're thinking a little bit more subjectively. If the adult is just relaying back like, oh, this is what I do, then that would be like a different coaching strategy. That would be information sharing. But with reflection, the adult learner is actually putting kind of their feelings about it. So I think that might work because, or I feel like I can try that this week. And that's a very different principle than just telling an adult what to do or what they're going to work on or how they're going to practice. So reflection really solidifies information for adults too. So that puts us at A, so SCRAP, and that's active participation. So we want our adult learners not to watch, we want them to actively participate with their child in that relationship. So the early intervention visit, when it's triadic and that we're supporting the dyad, so the parent and the child, then they're actively participating. It's like when we go to a training, we do our CEU courses and we learn all this great information, but until we actually get to put it back into practice, then we say, oh, I didn't have a client that whatever would work with, that we feel like we didn't learn anything. Well, we learned it, but we're adult learners, so we need to actively practice, and so do parents. So that puts us at SCRAP. So the first P is for problem solving. I spelled SCRAP with 2 P's. So problem solving is another coaching strategy, but it's also, a way to think about what is valuable to the parent? So are we addressing their concerns and their priorities? And are we addressing them in a way that is, let me just recite what you should do? Or are we problem solving with the parent? So saying things like, I wonder what would happen if, or instead of saying, I'm the specialist and here's what you're going to do, we say, have you tried? What's already doing? Or I noticed this works in this situation. I wonder about, or just wondering with the parent, right? But again, it's giving that parent the opportunity to put something back into their own words and to be active in their learning. So that is the P, scrap. And then the last P is for practice. So this means that, the adult has opportunities to practice throughout the week. And that's really where the routines-based intervention piece ties in more, because when we're embedding our coaching within daily routines, if we're embedding within hand washing or within teeth brushing or putting on a sock, climbing in and out of a high chair, all these daily routines happen so repeatedly that it gives adults and also the child many opportunities to practice, versus the potato head that I brought in and played with and then took away and I'll bring back next week. So those are really the adult learning principles that I reference in terms of our work in early intervention the most.
Awesome. And all of those lend themselves to that coaching model so nicely, because with the coaching model, it's not the top-down approach. We're not going in as the expert and spitting out all these strategies and advice for the parent to do because we're the expert and they're, quote, just the parent. When we deliver early intervention services through the coaching model, we want that parent to really feel and understand that they are an equal part of this process, of this intervention. And so all those principles that you just outlined with the lovely acronym SCRAP, I love acronyms, they help me remember things, so I appreciate that. But all of those, the problem solving, the reflection, the participation, those all allow the parent to be an equal partner in this, which is what has to happen for effective service, effective, intervention to happen. So I really appreciate that acronym, and I'm going to have to write it down because I don't have it memorized yet, but it really is helpful to make sure that, again, our service is delivered and considering the parent as that equal partner. Now, the first letter, the S for simple, I laugh at myself because I get so excited sometimes when I'm working with families, because I'm like, oh, we should try this and this will work because they're at this development, and we should, because as professionals, we have all these strategies swirling in our head, which is good. We need to know lots of strategies because not every strategy is going to work for every family. So we need to try different things in different ways and different routines. But I have to sometimes slow myself down and keep it simple and just, work on one strategy at a time. Because parents, like you mentioned, they have a lot going on, typically other children, maybe working, outside the home. So yeah, that's probably the biggest one for me to remember, is that keeping it simple. But thank you. Okay, good. So we have our acronym SCRAP with 2 Ps, which outlines those adult learning principles that we should be following as effective early intervention providers with the coaching method. So Stacy, I think maybe I touched on this just a little bit, but kind of a follow-up question. So, why are these principles so important? Why do we need to follow them to be effective in our practice?
We don't need to follow them. We right? So we can not apply them, and then we can maybe have the experience of being a little bit discouraged when we think things aren't carrying over or generalizing, or we think, well, I showed them or I told them, to try this. But if we really want to see, if we really believe in the world of early intervention, that the intervention can happen whether we're there or not, right? So it doesn't take us, it doesn't take us being there for that child to receive opportunities to practice or learn or develop with their family. So if we believe that, then we know we might have a failed system if we don't apply these principles, right? And I think a lot of us listening are thinking, I do show parents, I do tell parents, I do give this handout, I do that. And then, and then I wonder, do we watch to see if that means it's actually happening? So we talk about, let's use a really common strategy is wait time in early intervention, just pause, wait, let's see if the child will initiate or do something. And then we see it happening constantly. So we think we've told the parent, we've asked them, we've asked them if they understand it. We ask them to try. And then maybe we practice with them a little bit, like maybe during a snack, we might say, here's, we'll put the little cracker bag on the tray and we'll wait, right? And the parent gets really good at that. And we say, oh, good. Like they've seen me do it. They're doing the same thing. And then, the next thing happens where the child wants the TV on. And they walk up to the TV and the parent turns it on, right? And we think, oh, that was such a great opportunity for them to wait. And then we're surprised, like, well, we've taught them that opportunity. So when we apply the adult learning principles, we're more likely to see that skill generalization because the parents now putting their learning back into their own words, problem solving on other opportunities throughout their day where they might incorporate the strategies, they're actively participating. So when it happens, we're there again as that triadic piece to say, I wonder what would happen. And for the parent to realize on their own, like, oh, this is the same thing that, we did before. And so, yeah, I think it's just really important to think about the principles in terms of our effectiveness. So we just had, guests on Coach to Coach last week, Dr. Megan Roberts and PhD candidate Bailey Sohn from Northwestern's Early Intervention Research Group. And they just, we had them on because their recent research is on caregiver outcomes. And why are they in early intervention? So why are they studying caregiver outcomes? Was one of my questions. And it's really because, well, if caregivers improve their outcomes, then children improve their outcomes, right? So we can work with the child directly and not use like maybe a coaching model. But what we know is that if we can support caregivers and if we can apply those adult learning principles, that will support the caregivers to improve their outcomes, to then in turn improve child outcomes.
Right. Some important research coming out of there. That's awesome. I'm so glad you had them on, and I'm so sad I missed that one. but that's great. Awesome. So Stacey, something I run into, and I don't really know how best to handle it, so I'm interested in your advice and guidance, and I'm sure it's probably some other EI providers run into this too, is when I invite the parent to try out a strategy, sometimes they're reluctant. And I can understand that because I feel like sometimes they feel like they might be being judged, especially the families that I'm just starting out with. So, if I model a strategy, I think it's a good thing to try out within the routine that we're working on within that session. And the parent is reluctant. How do you coach them through that? How do you guide them through that to encourage that active participation that you can then observe in the session to give feedback and suggest something?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely the most common obstacle or hurdle that I think those of us working in early intervention can relate to, because we think, well, we're trying, but developing the relationship with the parent, building that trust, having them feel comfortable, that can be such a challenge. So we have, that's why we have really our coach to coach community of practice, is because we're all dealing with challenges surrounding all these different dynamics, and every family is so different. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to give like a cookie cutter answer, but I'll just say some things that have been helpful is that coaching strategy, which is, this isn't specific to our adult learning topic, but in general, just observing and pointing out strengths. So keeping in mind that strengths-based approach, that idea of every child and every parent and every family has strengths. And for those of us that are therapists, listening, our mindset is often, because of how we were mostly trained, is deficit-based, right? So if we're strengths-based, we're spotting all the things that are going well. And if we're deficit-based, we're noticing, this doesn't meet that milestone, or this, is an area for growth, which is also, you have to know about typical child development to even spot those things, right? So it just shows our knowledge base. So that's a strength for us as therapists, early interventionists, to even spot the areas for growth. But when we watch or we want parents to participate, there is I think there's often a natural inclination for parents to feel like they're not doing it right, or to feel insecure, right? So to me, one of the biggest things that has improved active participation by adults is just pointing out strengths really naturally and honestly and genuinely, not just coming up with things, but really being genuine about it and saying, during the incidental moments. And when I say incidental moments, I mean those things that a parent might not realize we're even watching or are important or that we're paying attention to. So they're talking to us and they're updating us. And at the same time, they're wiping their child's face. And, we might come back to it later, or we might casually interrupt and just say, oh, hold on. I want to hear what you're saying, but I noticed that he came up to you and you wiped his face. So he is initiating with you. And you're responding, you're so able to read his cues, right? And so when we're naturally just spotting things and pointing out strengths, at least from my experience, I find that parents are more likely to feel comfortable to show more things, right? Or to say, okay, this is a safe space. I've built trust with this person, so I can participate and feel, okay to receive strengths-based feedback, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you make such a good point, because oftentimes we know as professionals, it's at no fault of the parents that their child is experiencing delays in development. But oftentimes I feel parents do blame themselves. So if we're able to start out, delivering service in a way that focuses on the parent's strengths that are already in place, building that trust and rapport early, parents appreciate that. And I've seen, the look on a parent's face change when I'm able to point out something even incidentally that's happening that is a positive and a strength that the parent has in their relationship with their child. It really makes such a difference. So I appreciate that, because it's, sometimes we can be so focused on fixing the quote problem or fixing the deficit that we forget to reflect back on those positives and those strengths that already exist. And going back to the acronym SCRAP, that the R standing for reflection, right? Okay. So I've found too that if I can get a parent to reflect on a situation where they have done something and I help them realize that what they did worked or helped their child, it's so empowering to them, right? So then that also helps build that rapport and trust, and opens the lines of communication a little bit more, and then makes them a little more willing to join me in applying a strategy in real time so I can observe and give feedback. But yeah, that's like the number one thing, right? Because we are coaching the parent or the caregiver, we have to develop that relationship and that rapport with them to really have successful sessions and positive experience for the whole family and the child included. Good. Okay. All right. So you have the acronym, and it's in my mind, and I'm going to write it in my notebook. So when I go into sessions, I keep it in mind for every visit that I have with a family. But tell me, I know you have some other tricks up your sleeve, Stacy. How do you make sure or keep yourself on track with implementing this? Do you have any resources or anything that you do at every session? Do you document as you're working through a session? Do you just hold the information in your mind? Do you reflect as a professional after sessions to see if you missed any steps in the acronym? Share with us so that we can better implement this acronym and these adult learning principles into our practice.
Okay, good questions, because I feel like this is such a short, we could talk about it all day.
Yes.
Yeah, what do I do specifically? So some of the things that I think really help for adult learners, well, one of my favorites is anytime you can incorporate video. So if you're providing early intervention and you can record a session with a family and watch back together, I mean, that to me is one of the best ways to learn. And that's really what we do in Coach to Coach, so that we can see ourselves, watch ourselves, and then reflect on it. So when we watch ourselves, there's all those opportunities for problem solving, for reflection, for just all the coaching strategies, observation, feedback. It just provides such a rich opportunity. So, and then if that doesn't work, or you don't have the capability, like you're saying, when you're building this relationship with parents and you're getting them to reflect on what is going well or what they're doing well, having them send you videos, right? And watching them together and saying like, okay, I got your video, let's watch this together. And pausing and saying like, what do you think is going well here? And asking the parent, just like you said, to put in their words what they think is going well. So these are just different ideas that are kind of popping up. I also really love creating like action plans with the parents, or homework, I guess, which isn't, an assignment so much as what do you want to remember and work on during this week? What's the child ready to do right now? Versus let me reference their 6-month IFSP goal that they're not there yet. Like what are we ready to do right now? Okay, well, when you go to the mailbox, that's another opportunity to practice signing open, right? So that's the little baby step. That's keeping it simple for the parent versus the big, okay, so we're working on this sign and this sign and this sign and this sign. Like, what if we say, okay, what is the little thing we're going to do? We're keeping it simple. That tends to be my area of weakness, where I want to give a lot of ideas, practice a lot of strategies, practice a lot of, in a lot of contexts. And so I tend to go back to that first one, that simplify things. And then I think parents are pretty good about letting me know too. They'll say like, I feel like, I want a little bit more to work on. Right. And then also talking. So one of the big things I try to do with parents is talk to them about adult learning, talk to them about, we all like to learn differently. And for those of us who are coaching, we often gravitate towards a certain style. So some of us are more direct, some are, may be really strong listeners. And so we have different styles of coaching. And I'll also tell parents too, I tend to be pretty good at guiding you through practice and giving using a coaching strategy that from Dr. Julianne Wood's work, it talks about like different definitions of coaching strategies. So I know about myself that I am pretty good with guided practice, and that's sort of guiding the parent through a routine and giving them like little, okay, hold it lower, offer a choice, like guiding them within it, right? So I might even tell a parent, I tend to do a lot of this, but I don't know if that's how you like to learn. Maybe you're a trial and error learner. Maybe you just want to get in there and then talk about it after. Maybe you want to problem solve together first. Maybe you want to watch me first. Maybe all of these different things, right? So just talking to parents about what coaching in general is and adult learning, I think is a good way to stay mindful. You also asked if I do self-reflection. Yes, and I love it. I love kind of setting little goals for myself, seeing how close I am to meeting them. Often those goals are different for each family. So like with this family, I want to get in a few more routines. With this family, I want, to see if I can incorporate a sibling, whatever it is, right? And then I'll just sort of reflect on my own, how is that going? And often it will come up as, is there something I'm not doing here? Well, I was talking a lot. I don't know if I gave them enough opportunity to reflect for themselves, to participate on their own without me sort of doing something that they could have been doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm answering your question.
Yes, you absolutely are. And you mentioned video observation, like if the parents have a video and share it with you and you kind of walk them through. Would that also be a strategy? I've never tried it, but maybe you have, for that reluctant parent that's not quite ready to actively participate in a strategy or a suggestion you're making in real time? Do you ever suggest to a parent maybe they could video that routine and send it to you, and then you can provide, just seems a little maybe less intimidating for them than, again, in the moment?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll say, we could try that now, or would you feel comfortable to try that? Or what would be an opportunity where we could do this? And then a lot of times it's not the right time. Like it's, whatever time I'm there is not going to be bath time or going to be, and so I might say, maybe we could try this next week at this time. I know it would be a little bit different than your everyday time that you would do it. Or you could also send me a video. I'd love to see how they, participate in getting in and out of the tub, or choosing, getting dressed or whatever it is. Or so you can send me a video of, all the little everyday things that happen. So that's a nice way, because it also sort of gives parents a choice. And, we all use that choice strategy with children. Like, do you want this or this? But if we ask the parent, like, as a yes, no, like, how does that sound? It's very easy for them to say like, okay, and then not follow through on it. Because, which is no fault to the parent, but just they get busy, whatever. Or we could say, something like, well, what would work best for you? Would you like to send me a video of it? Or do you think maybe we could try it next time? And then it's, again, sort of allowing the parent to do what they're comfortable with, if they're comfortable with it. And then, and using video is such a a lot of parents may seem reluctant at first, but what I found is that once you video or you do the video modeling with them, they tend to want to keep doing it, right? Because
I like
it's
it.
so cool to like watch together and problem solve through it. It's such a great activity,
Right.
learning activity. Mhm.
Right. And two, not only just for that that comfort factor for the parent, maybe just initially starting out if they're not comfortable performing kind of, in real time, it also can extend the ability for us as early intervention providers to observe other routines that we're not able to spend an entire day with a family. And oftentimes our appointment time, like you said, isn't always at bath time whenever the child does that. So then again, it allows us to observe a skill or a carryover of a strategy in those other routines, which can be really helpful to the family, I'm sure, to get that feedback in all the routines, not just one specific one that we're actually there in the home for. Okay, so I just want to ask you, so when you discuss a strategy with a family, you discuss what routine you're going to implement it into, maybe even you practice it. I imagine there's some adults whose learning style that would be enough. Kind of doing it with you in real time, they've got it, they're going to implement it in the next week or two between your sessions. But I imagine there's other adults that have a different learning style that might need a little bit more than just participating. So do you ever leave I've heard ideas of like jotting down the strategy and the routine and putting it on a post-it note on the fridge? Or do you ask the family, specifically, tell me how I can share information with you. Tell me how best it would be to remind you. I've heard of, providers, early intervention providers sending a text midweek. How's this going? So I'm just curious, what are your ideas and strategies for that to help with the carryover of the family implementing the strategy when you're not there?
Yeah, that's all of those are, I think, important things to just have a way to communicate exactly what maybe the family is comfortable to work on or to try. And I have a specific format that I like to use that I gravitate towards, and that's from, again, Family Guided Routines Based Intervention, which is fgrbi.com, Dr. Julianne Wood's work. She, sort of outlines this way to share information with families that I prefer, but I also have done the note on the post-it note on the bathroom mirror as the reminder of when we're in this routine, what to do, or the text, or midweek email. All of those things work. The one I was going to reference is sort of like it's a simple thing that you can fill out with the family. So you basically kind of talk about, if you're picturing like 4 columns, like the first one would have the target. So the target would just be that really simple, opening the mailbox or signing open, like the thing the child's ready to work on right now, not like a big goal. And then in parent friendly language, of course. And then the next column would be the context. So where, like during opening drawers to get dressed, or opening the book, or opening the yogurt, or opening the mailbox, right? So you don't have to put 20, you might put 2 or 4 or whatever, something simple, but you'd put the context. And then the next column would be the strategy, right? So what is the parent actually going to do? So they're going to model the sign, maybe not, maybe they're going to wait. And that's all determined based on the child, the parent, and that problem solving, right? Determining, because that's going to be individualized. So then after you sort of develop you identify the strategy, then the last column is the opportunity. So you get a little bit more detailed there. I might write something a little bit longer, like, okay, before you're at the mailbox, wait. And then after 5 seconds, model the sign. And then after, a little longer, say the word or whatever it is, to give the child, the support they need wherever that child's at. So I use kind of like a format like that because it's pretty simple and easy to do with parents. And I think that there's many others that different people use, because there's so many different, I'm sure like Hannon and Russian Sheldon and all of these different people who are pretty iconic in our field for coaching would have great resources on those types of carryover things for parents too.
Right. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember. Again, going back to how an adult learns, what those adult learning principles are, how to leave that information in a way that they're going to be able to remember to apply it, and then being able to apply it. And it sounds like little sheet that you're referencing that you fill out at the end of sessions, it's specific and it kind of, explains the why, like we're going to do this because we're working on this and this is how we're going to do it. And you're going to break it down into this small step because that's so important. As you mentioned in the very beginning of our talk, parents need to know the why, they need to understand not only what to do or how to implement it, but why are we working on this when our end goal is for my child to be talking in sentences, right? So it's important that we remind them of that so that we get that participation and that understanding.
Yeah. And what you're talking about is really important. And I didn't want to beat a dead horse with the why, but I'm glad you brought it up again, because when we explain why this target, like why signing open at the mailbox, well, because, we have, that's where our expertise comes in, and we can share about, signs being a way to communicate while words potentially develop, or picture communication, or whatever it is. But when we explain that, we draw in the parent's priorities. So remember, at our IFSP meeting, you identified that you wanted him to be able to communicate his wants and needs, right? So this is a step towards him being able to do that. So when we relate back, then it's like we're addressing that parent priority. And then we have more buy-in from the family, because they realize, they make the connection also as, oh, she understands what my priorities are for my child, and is there to help me get to the point where that child can meet my bigger goals. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Good. Okay, so Stacy, this is all such wonderful information. Again, I really appreciate you joining me and talking about all this, and hopefully it reaches the ears of lots of early intervention providers and families receiving early intervention services so that they can, again, make the most of the service that they are providing or receiving. Do you have any recommendations? So I want you to talk about your community of practice, Coach the Coach, and even beyond that, resources that you would recommend for early intervention providers to learn more about adult learning principles or the coaching model of service delivery. Just share any information that would be relevant for those that want to pursue more learning of this topic.
Yeah. So adult learning is not rocket science. So like, that's the good news. You don't have to, spend hours and hours trying to learn about it. I think it's more about practicing it yourself, right? Self-reflection on it and thinking about how you learn, how we learn as adults. So I've done the same thing where, over the pandemic, I taught myself pretty basic, but how to read music and play piano. And I just basically took adult learning principles and put them into place, right? So that's what I would encourage, is say, get the practice with yourself, find out how you like to learn, notice how you like to coach, and then get comfortable talking to parents about it. But in terms of like actual resources for people who want to go a little bit deeper, I do have a professional bias towards fgrbi.com or Dr. Julianne Wood's work with family guided routines based intervention. So that's all a ton of free resources that are just all supportive of adult learning principles. And it's going to get more specific on coaching and how to structure your early intervention sessions. And that's just, to me, that would be my go-to, knowing that we want to keep things simple for adults and your audience is adults. Right. So knowing that, I don't want to give tons of information, because then I'd be doing the exact opposite of
what you recommend.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to just give like a few simple resources. So I love fgrbi.com. And I also, there is a podcast that is by Krista Tippett. She does an On Being podcast, and it's not related to the field of early intervention. It's related to, just interesting guests. And so she had a guest on before. His name is Daniel Kahneman, and he's an economist. He's a psychologist, an economist, and an author. His last name is Kahneman. But he talks about two different thinking systems. So you could Google it, the On Being Daniel Kahneman podcast. But he talks about how, we think with two different systems. And anyways, the principles that he discusses in there, I think, are really valid for us to think about when we're considering adult learners. And knowing that adults have this procedural memory, right? So we do a lot of things automatically. We tie our shoes without thinking about it. We wash our hands without thinking about it. We don't remember where we put the toothpaste when we finished with it. We might, because we always put it in the same spot. But if we didn't, we wouldn't notice it, because we're probably multitasking, talking to one of our kids or another adult, and not noticing, because we can do so many actions physically with our bodies without being deliberate and thinking about it. So that procedural memory is like how he talks about one thinking system. And then we have our deliberate, focused, problem-solving thinking system. And that's the thinking we use when we answer questions like 17 times 24. Or that's the thinking we use when we have to weigh the pros and cons. So it's like really focused thinking. It's not this automatic, like, let me throw the clothes in the dryer thinking, right? But and he doesn't really get into how this works with children. But what I gather from it is that, adults go through these motions every day with their kids: clipping the buckle on the car seat, turning on the water, washing hands, getting in and out of the high chair. And all of these little moments are these everyday routines, right? And we're so procedural about them. And kids are using that other thinking system. They're focused and deliberate, and they can't do them automatically yet, especially young children, right? So what we need is adults to be present in those routines with children and slow down and use that more deliberate type of thinking system to embed strategies to change what you would do automatically, which is clip the buckle on the car seat, and instead pause and wait, right? But we know it's really challenging for adults to change our behaviors. So anyway, this is getting into a much deeper level now of adult learning, but I would just say, being aware of how adults and children think and move through the world differently can be kind of interesting and valuable. So that's a cool podcast that's not totally just in-depth early intervention or adult learning, but something to consider looking at. And then I have a 30-minute podcast, not a podcast. I have a 30-minute webinar just on adult learning, and that people have access to when they decide to join our coach to coach community. They have access to all the webinars and the recorded events, and we meet on a monthly basis because I've been doing professional development courses for 5 or 6 years. And I always say in them, I'm like, this is not how we learn best. We don't learn best by going to a one-day course or a 2-hour event and walking away. So the community of practice developed because I said we need a way to meet together and learn together and practice together. So that's what we do, right? We watch videos of home visits, we pause, we do the video modeling, we problem solve, we reflect, we write notes and give feedback and observe strengths, and then we do it again next month. Because that's how adults learn, right? We learn by ongoing learning and practice.
Yeah. And that is such a powerful thing. The watching videos of colleagues and other professionals doing the exact thing that we're doing in our practice as early intervention professionals. I mean, I learned so much. I wasn't brave enough to volunteer to be videoed, but I'm glad that other people did. Yeah. Yeah. Because and gosh, that makes sense. We don't learn by just going to the one-day conference, and you realize that, and you're doing something different now. So thank you, because I know that's benefiting so many professionals in our field, myself included, for the short time I was a part of it. But so if people would like to check out your community of practice, Coach the Coach, a little bit more, where do they go to find that information?
Sure. So it's, we did start out as Coach the Coach, and we changed the wording just to be Coach to Coach. So so that's clear in case they're looking in the wrong spot. So probably one of the easiest places to find us is Instagram, which is pretty new, and I'm not a huge social media person. So it's not very detailed, but you'll get the basics. And that's our Instagram handle is at ei.coaching. And you could just kind of gather more information. Our website's on there. So the website is just my name. It's www.stacey, Stacey, my last name, Landberg, LANDBERG.com /subscribe. And then there's all the information there about how to join and, some upcoming dates of events. All the events are recorded. So if you can't join live and you subscribe, then you get You can watch them later, of course. And yeah, it's a growing community of practice, primarily word of mouth. But we do invite anybody who's working in early intervention. So we have people across all disciplines. And yes, you do have to be courageous to volunteer video, but everybody who does, tends to be really grateful for the opportunity. And it's not a requirement. You don't have to share your own videos to participate.
Yes, good to share that. So, and two, in preparation for our podcast, I visited fgrbi.com, and man, they have some wonderful resources. I downloaded all kinds of good stuff just to look over later to pass off to families. So I know you mentioned that earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate that to the audience, fgrbi.com, family guided routines-based intervention.com. So check that out for sure. Okay, Stacy, so if anybody that's listening has a specific question they'd like to ask you, is there a way that they can reach out to you directly?
Yeah, I would say probably the easiest way is they could go to the website that I shared before and fill out like a contact email. And they can also send a message through our Instagram.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And everyone listening, I will put the resources that Stacy mentioned in the podcast in the bio, the description of the podcast, so you can access all of that there. And Stacy, again, we thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge about adult learning principles and a little bit of extra stuff thrown in there with us today. And we just appreciate your time and we wish you well. And hopefully everyone listening will take advantage of this knowledge that you shared and improve their practice in the world of early intervention.
Thank you, Lacey. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate
Great.
it.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of More Than Child's Play podcast. Please follow us on Facebook. Find us on Instagram at Milestones Miracles and on Twitter at MilestonesM.